All right. Hangout says that the Hangout on air is live. Yeah, let's go ahead and get started. First thing is open up the Google Doc from the link in the meeting if you could, and make sure you put your name under attendees so we know who's here. Okay, sorry to the Richards, they still are having trouble. He just wrote on the issue. If somebody could just chime back in there, maybe they could watch on YouTube, I guess. I'm not sure what we can do for them at the moment. Yeah, so put your name in there, and then let's go ahead and jump into the agenda. So basically it breaks down into stuff related to inspector, stuff related to trace, and stuff related to async context. And I invited the postmortem people to join us, namely Richard Chamberlain and Richard Lau, who we're trying to get on the call. So they might be able to give us an update on a couple projects coming out of that group. And I thought it would be good for us all to be aware of each other, since there's a lot of overlap in the domains we're targeting. Okay, so let's just briefly review our previous meeting, which actually was at Node Interactive in the Collaboration Summit. Under Trace, we talked about what we expect people to use Trace for. We talked about that we do want a JS API for Trace. And we talked a little bit about what conventions might be for people to use different category names and different payload fields. And we talked a little about trace points in core. Looking at the next steps, I think we added the experimental warning. We had a brief discussion about how to abstract from V8, and we delayed that. We put that off for now. We landed the PR. Congratulations, Matt. And then the last one actually was kind of on me, and we didn't do it yet. Break out the tasks in the Diag repo, and that's something we'll talk about today, I think. Under inspector last time, we said that we want to deprecate the interface, so Node-debug, deprecate the CLI debugger, get Jan Krem's Node inspect in as a replacement for the old CLI debugger. And we came up with a strategy for activating inspector in a running process. I think also here we've covered a lot of the next steps. We've been discussing what else needs to be deprecated, like the doc step deprecation. I opened an issue for deprecating the CLI debugger, which we'll talk about a little today. We've opened the issues to bring Node inspect in. Ongoing discussion about how exactly to bundle the CLI debugger. In the thread about switching to SIG user 1, I think Eugene Ostrokov from Google said that he's working on that. And we probably need to think about messaging changes to the community still. We talked a little there about async context propagation, and basically the call to action was to review the new and better API, which I think Trevor was adding, and I'm sure Jeremiah could tell us about. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into today's. So I tried to organize under the minutes section in the doc, give us a kind of a flow here. So the first couple items are some requests for comments about new capabilities that Google or Eugene is proposing in the inspector protocol. So I guess since we're all together, I just thought it would be a good time for us to come up with an opinion on that and whether we want that in Node. And so the first one is support for sub-process inspection. Obviously, you can look at the issue. Basically, should the inspector be able to proxy inspector commands to another sub-process, which could be particularly useful for clusters and things. So let's just open it up for discussion. What do we think about that?
Sounds useful. I don't really have much else to comment on other than that.
Is it at all, I'm thinking about this also, is it at all a concern that those processes won't be clearly started with, say, -- inspect, and yet will be subject to inspection? Is there any concerns with that, or?
We could have child process spawn those with like a similar thing, I think, if it's built into Node.
I think this proposal is essentially that if inspector is running in the parent process, then it would, I guess you're right. It's not clear in the proposal whether it would be obvious within that process that it was being inspected. I don't really know. So overall, though, we think this is a good idea.
I mean, it looks like it sounds like a good idea on the surface, but I don't know what the details of that might all be.
Okay. So maybe we'll just reply on that issue that in today's meeting, consensus is that this is a good idea. Go for it.
At least move forward with a proof of concept, yeah. It might be more useful to take a look at what the implications of that might be.
Yeah. All right, so let's move to the next one. Similar request from Eugene about adding inspector support for network protocol tracing. So I guess there are two questions: whether we want to support network protocol tracing, and then another question that came up in the thread is whether that should go through the trace system at least first, or through inspector. So again, I want to open it up for our comments. Do we think this is a good idea? Do we prefer the trace event route?
I prefer the async hooks events route. So the only thing that I'd have the big thing I'd have with this is if you're trying to display like all HTTP connections in like in the what's that thing called, the Chrome inspector, is that right? Yeah. Like it's not like a website where, I mean, some websites have a lot, but if you're trying to like look at most, I feel like most like uses of Node that actually significantly use HTTP and look at that in a DevTools inspector, like there's just going to be so much of it, like you won't be able to tell what's going on. Like I guess you might be able to get some insight for a connection, but I think it'll mostly just be like a flood of information. And I'm not sure what kind of performance impact that might have either.
I think that's a valid concern, but maybe that's like for us, like yes, Chrome DevTools would be one of the main consumers, but it could be consumed by other tools also. Like, I mean, with Microsoft, we'd probably have it consumed in something else. And I assume Chrome DevTools could make adjustments to their UI also. So are there any concerns with having it in the system itself, forgetting about, how it might be presented?
I mean, I still think async hooks is better suited to the task.
And so what do you mean by that, async hooks? Like, you're saying if you wrap network connections with async hooks, then we'll...
I mean, well, network connections already are wrapped with async hooks. So, are we just duplicating the same thing?
No, it wouldn't be duplicating. So trace event currently does not instrument Node, but the idea would be wherever you have async hooks, you probably want trace events at the same places. So what trace event is a mechanism to get some important data out to debuggers or other tooling. And however that tooling wants to display it, or if better tooling can be built to better show this, I think it's up to the tool writers to do it, right? So the objective we should have as part of Diagnostics is like provide a communication channel through through which the data can be exposed to tooling at a low level, and let others build whatever higher level tooling and debugging tools that they can.
So Ali, the question here is about whether to add support for the network domain into the inspector agent, I guess, the V8 inspector in Node. And then the secondary question is, if we do want to support that, is the right place to start by going through trace events?
Yeah, actually, I was talking earlier. Seems like the mic wasn't working, so I don't know what you heard or didn't hear. So my personal opinion is I think we should add support to trace event first, because we certainly need ability in trace event to get information about network traffic, because that's the whole idea of tracing. And that may be adequate. I don't think maybe we don't need. Maybe that's adequate for dev tools or other debuggers to work with whatever they need to do. And if there's some deficiencies, I think we can go from there. And I do think it should be built on top of async hooks. But trace event is probably the starting point, in my opinion.
So is what you're suggesting then, I'm not really sure how you can fire a trace event, but would it be possible to have like an NPM module? I'm not sure if it need to have native parts in it, but then hooked into async hooks, and then it fired the trace events?
I think so. I mean, well,
there will be performance implications of that.
Right. Do you just mean going from JS to C++ and back?
Correct. If you can do so for Node Core, for native stuff, if you can fire the trace event directly from our C++ binding code, that would be the most performant way of doing it.
Well, it's not going to be an iteration 1, but there's supposed to be a C++ events API too. So, but that's good to know.
Yeah, in the prototype that Matt built, he actually put the trace events in exactly all the places that async hooks, async wrap is there. So it's a very natural place to put the trace event instrumentation. He didn't put it in his pull request, but that's the easiest way to add this tracing to Node Core.
So I think we should use async hooks as the entry point to capture that network event data. We should write that network event data into the trace event system. For what Eugene asked, do we want to somehow expose that from there into the network domain in the inspector protocol?
Yeah, I think we should get in touch with Eugene on this one. Yeah, actually, in hindsight, I should have added him to this meeting. But yeah, I think we should touch base with the debugger people, see what's the easiest way for them to consume this data, whether trace event is adequate, and if not, what are the deficiencies, and what kind of a domain do we need in Inspector for network stuff.
Okay, I was talking with Jason, who's on the call here, and one of the things that would be important probably if we went the trace event route would be listeners that could capture, well, in this case it would be network events, but could be other ones too. And that's actually something Jason's been thinking about, is how to listen, how either C++ or JS modules could listen.
Right, so if we wanted to hook this into the inspector protocol, the way we do that is set up a trace event listener at the C++ level, and that listener would receive trace events and translate those to the inspector protocol. The missing piece there is that there's not currently support for trace listeners in the V8 implementation of tracing. There's some infrastructure there for it, but when V8 took trace event from Chromium, they stripped out a lot of stuff they didn't want, and the listener support was excluded. We have to add that back in.
Yeah, okay. I can circle back to Eugene and the trace event team to see what the best way to proceed here might be. Whether we bring in that listener support or whether there's some other way to implement this.
Okay, for the purposes of this conversation, I think we kind of had a straw man, which was use async hooks to get the events, write them to trace event, use trace event listeners potentially to send them over if we wanted them to go on the inspector protocol or something like that. That sound about right?
Yeah, it makes sense.
I'm writing down, Ali, that you're going to discuss with Eugene. Anything else on that? All right, so let's move to the next one, which is about deprecating the old debug agent and the CLI debugger. I opened this PR. It's not finished up. We kind of said, actually, that's what I want to bring up is what are the timelines? Should we land this now? I think one of the feedback was we should make sure node inspect is ready to go. An option is to just separate out these two and deprecate the debug agent and wait to deprecate the CLI debugger till node inspect lands. Actually, I'll propose that. You all can disagree if you want.
Which branch are you targeting with this?
It would be to be cut in the next release. I think. Well, I mean, we could talk about that, but I think we want it to go into a 7x release.
Yeah, I would, because it's not going to exist at all in 8, right?
Well, that actually is another thing. It depends if we go with V8.5.7 or V8.5.8, as I understand.
Correct.
Would there be other motivation to go with V8.5.8?
Actually, there might be some motivation not to go with V8.5.8. So there V8.5.8 might include turbofan as a default JIT compiler. So, and given that it's LTS, I don't know if you want to pick up the first version of turbofan when it becomes a default.
Interesting.
So to be clear, 5.8 doesn't include the old debugger at all. It also includes turbofan.
So 5.8 also will not include the exposed debug as command line flag. Actually, that's probably the bigger reason why we don't want to go with 5.8 for 8x. And the timeline is a bit too close. I think 5.8 comes out at the very end of April, which is probably too late for us to ship with Node 8.
Do we here have as a group do we have an opinion, like as the diagnostics group, that look, we should stick with 5.7 to make it easier for this transition? Meaning, if it comes down to it, and James is like, we want to go 5.8, should we make a stink and say no? We need to stay 5.7 to keep this around.
I have an opinion, but I don't know if as a group, my opinion or as a group diagnostic opinion really matters. I think at the end of the day, it's CDC that has to decide and weigh the pros and cons.
Yeah, we can still make a suggestion to them too, though.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking, really. Would we suggest that we stay with 5.8? Stay with 5.7 because then we give a little more time for this adjustment.
I certainly support that.
Yeah, I would say probably.
This kind of makes a difference. Like well, actually, that's the question. Does it make a difference? So should we land the deprecations nevertheless now at 750 or whenever the next chance we get?
No. So we should only land it in a already existing major branch if it will be removed in the next version. I think so. I think actually technically then, if we had a choice on that, then the CTC should probably pick 5.7 because it breaks our semverness far less.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So we kind of need the CTC to make a decision soon if they're going to go with 5.7 or right? And if so, then we don't have to land this now and we'll get it into the 8x branch.
Yeah, it would be good to get CTC sign off on this as 5.7 being the target. If that's the case, then yeah, it makes our path ahead much simpler.
Okay, so I think the next steps on this is to ask the CTC to tell us what the plan is for 5.7, 5.8. Go from there. Any other items there around deprecation? All right, so let's move on to the next one. This is actually another one of mine. And actually, I think this should be separated. So I put up a PR to update the hint text that comes out when you do -- inspect and to add a guide about it. I'm pretty sure now that they're working on separating out the guides to different part of the org, I think Node.js.org repo. So I'll move that guide over there in some form and we can all review it. So that's Josh to move guide to org. I do think we should talk about the hint text though, and that's just because we're getting it's become almost a standard feature, and maybe we should make sure that we're providing the information that people need in a easily consumable form. I'll put a straw man out there, I guess. Like we could potentially return the JSON that we return with if you do like JSON/list. Meaning, what I'm thinking about is that people need that GUID. Or do people need the full URL with the Chrome DevTools? I guess that's another question for this group.
Are we moving away from the DevTools URL for the stable release of this, whenever that might be?
Because that's part of the question. Should we move away from that URL? And if so, what should it, what should the output be? And maybe part of the question is, how do we get this out from the experimental state?
Actually, I think we have to get it out of experimental before 8.x, right? Because if you're going to deprecate the old CLI debugger or the old debug protocol.
I don't think we have to. Perhaps it'd be nice.
Okay, so two questions in that case. So first question is, yeah, what is needed for it to be not experimental? And then when we can get that done. So actually, yeah, it'd be good to get an understanding of when is it not experimental. If you're, like in my mind, if you're offering it, deprecating something and saying, use this instead, and it's experimental, it just doesn't seem right.
What do we need to do to get it out of experimental?
You need to have the CTC probably vote on it to or like open up PR that may, well, yeah, I think you'd probably need a CTC vote on it because it's a pretty large thing. Or at least you'd want CTC consensus on it. But I'm not sure if that can be done in a major or, no, it can be done in a minor because that's what we're going to do for async hooks too. Was there an EP on this? Not that there has to be. I'm just wondering. I don't recall if there was one or not for the inspector.
There isn't an EP on this.
I think it was an issue.
Okay.
We could try to find that.
I don't think it's super complicated. I would move forward with opening essentially a pull request that you tag as CTC agenda, and that you want to bring this out of experimental in a minor version.
We don't necessarily have to bring it out. Well, I guess it depends on the previous thing, but we could bring it out of experimental in 8.
You could, but I don't think it is necessarily Semver major unless anything API-wise is changing in that transition. The other major thing that we would that would be wanted is we essentially need some sort of consensus about from the people working on it that the API is probably not going to radically change in the near future. Because if it is, then it should still stay experimental. Does anyone have questions on that? I have some opinions on this specific pull request otherwise.
I was just going to mention that I'll paste the link in here from the Chrome DevTools team, what the protocol is now. And I think that's what I just want to make sure we have the info that the CTC is going to ask for. So I think you're asking if that protocol, the Chrome debugging protocol, is stable.
Yeah, essentially, but also any API parts that are implementation specific in any way. Okay. I'm not sure what the extent of those might be.
So what do you mean by API parts that are implementation specific? Can you elaborate?
Yeah, again, I'm not sure if there really are any. Like maybe you have some flag that does anything else that's like a part of it, like I don't know, debug break, and maybe that behavior still you're thinking might need to change a little bit. We wouldn't want to necessarily stabilize that unless like a couple of things like that. If you're already thinking they might need to be changed for any part of the exposed public API, essentially. If there's still thoughts that that's still going to really need to be changed, we would probably want to factor that into the decision. Does that help clear it up?
I'm not sure. So let's take let's say SIG user 1 for example, right? So at some point, SIG user 1 will start enabling the new debug protocol, but that doesn't have anything to do with the protocol or the protocol API itself. It's a node feature to have a debug service respond when SIG user 1 is sent. So I don't know if that's necessarily related. So I'm not sure. I'm trying to figure out what kind of things would be considered part of the API. So some other flags such as debug break, again, those are nodes flags.
Yeah.
How they enable or which protocol they enable are not dependent on the protocol.
Right. So it might be a lot simpler in the case of inspector. If we look at a similar example, so async hooks, if we were like, we might need to get rid of after in the future, or after might need to return vastly different parameters or something like that. Like we would probably still want to keep an experimental until we kind of iron that out. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. I guess so. The question is going to be: is there any sort of API this exposes, perhaps in process? Actually, by the way, I do know that Eugene is working on adding an API to exposes to JavaScript. So you could programmatically enable inspection from JavaScript. that sounds like a somewhere minor addition, not a change of the API, but a new
I
API.
would agree.
So, but yeah, so I think what you're saying is, is there any API whatsoever? Let's go figure it out and make sure that we're comfortable with saying, yeah, we don't need changes in this going forward.
Yeah, more for APIs that we think like either are in the current experimental API or that yeah, essentially stuff that is going to be in that first public API. If we're like, okay, we might need to radically change like some part of it. Not really like add on to it. Adding on to it's fairly simple.
Yeah, I can circle back and do a review. I don't think there's any API, or at least I'm not aware of any API right now. It's all internal to Node Core. So, but yeah,
Right.
we're good to revisit that and make sure.
Oh, you know what? I actually am thinking about that. I opened an issue a long time ago about it is tightly coupled right now from the WebSocket implementation all the way back to V8. And if other VMs want to plug in, we would have to do some refactoring in the middle. And I think Chakra will want to plug in eventually. So maybe that is something we might want to ask about.
Yeah, it would be good if you can talk to the folks there to see if if the plumbing is adequate for you to plug in Chakra Core, or if there's changes you want. I think it would be good to get some feedback on it sooner.
Okay, that's fair. So let me. We might need a little while for that, like a week or two. But if you, just thinking, should we go ahead and bring it up for CTC review? Probably, and then I can ask the Chakra Core people to look it over too and be part of that discussion.
Sounds good to me.
Cool.
So just on this actual pull request, I kind of agree with some of the change on the message. I think what's really important for the message to contain is a link to documentation. That way it's a little bit easier for us to list all the options to possibly interact with this. While it's an experimental, still issue a warning. And then I think it should probably print the whatever is actually needed from any implementation to connect to it, which is probably just the port. Or like port and GUID or whatever.
I guess V8 folks, Ali in particular, do you think that we should? Is it okay to take the Chrome DevTools URL out and just make it WS, host :port/GUID?
Let me talk to Powell and the DevTools team. I know that they were working on some feature in 5.6 that makes it really easy to connect. So the goal really is that anybody who's using it should have a very easy way to connect using multiple different debuggers, including DevTools. So let me circle back on that one to make sure those things did get into Chrome 5.6. Or whatever the status is.
Yeah, honestly, some of the comments are about the usability of that URL. Like it folds and people can't copy it and it's not automatic and they don't know the GUID and it changes. So it's not really only about like other tools, although obviously VS Code, brings it up from time to time. It's also about the pure usability.
Right.
It also like interferes with, it goes to standard error, I think, but it still clutters up the output.
Yeah, it'd be nice to print primarily like maybe docs info and then like the parts that you would actually need to paste into like Chrome or anywhere else to actually connect from anything essentially.
Sorry, and the doc crashed on me there. I think our next steps here are to move it out of experimental state, and Ali's going to handle that or get that going. As we move out of experimental state, that we're going to have to update the text then anyways. we'll update it then, and we'll get Ali. Maybe you can get the input from the DevTools team, and we can come up with something. I'll try to get VS Code to chime in, and we can come up with something. Yeah, so I guess there are really two things: get it out of experimental state, and as we get it out of experimental state, decide on what the hint text is. Okay. Next, node inspect. So that's pretty, I can give an update on that. We're pretty moved along with that. The CTC and the TSC both signed off on bringing it into the foundation. So it's just now logistics, probably me and William Kapke figuring out how to get it in. I think the only question that might remain for this group is is to just mention how we're considering bringing it in and see if there's other thoughts. So essentially now, to use the CLI debugger, you can run node space debug space userscript.js, and it actually runs the local node instance running a special debugger client, and then spins up the user script and attaches it to the local debugger. Do we want to have the same experience for node inspect, where somebody could type node space inspect space script.js, and or do we want node space debug still?
I don't have strong feelings on this one.
I would prefer if it could be kept. So essentially, have the functionality be at least reminiscent of node space debug.
Yeah,
I mean, we don't have like a huge debugging story for Node as it is, so having something like that, where pretty much anyone has access to it right away, is probably a good idea.
Yeah, I agree. I like to use that sometimes. I think that in that thread, I think Anna might have even done something to make that work, and it wasn't all that difficult. So basically, we support that, and that's how we'd like to see it integrated. Anything else around node inspect? Actually, the next one is kind of related. It was a proposal to move Ben's node heap dump tool, and basically that stuff is all accessible now via the inspector protocol. So it makes sense, and Jan has already done something similar for CPU profile. It would kind of make sense to just integrate that into node inspect, that functionality. I guess that's my suggestion there, and I wanted to bring that up.
I'm not really sure what this entails, so I'm not going to sign off on it.
I guess that's fair enough. Basically, it'll be once node inspect is in, I can make a PR to the repo to add that and refer to that issue. I think there are going to be a number of things like this. CPU profile and heap dump are two obvious ones, where now that it's available in Inspector, it's not a big jump to make it available in the CLI debugger.
Does Node heap dump also provide a JavaScript API? Because I talked to Trevor very briefly about this, and he wanted to kind of see like a v8 module.take heap snapshot sort of thing.
Yeah, it does have a that's what it does. It gives you a JS API to take a heap dump. And I personally also would like to see it in core, because it's fair. I mean, I don't know if inspect fully addresses the use case here. Many people have an aversion to using anything debug related in production, whereas heap dump has nothing to do with debug or debug ports. It just gives you a heap dump.
Is there anyone else that would have thoughts on us suggesting that this be not necessarily taken in, but essentially the same functionality be re-added to like the VM module on core? Or sorry, the V8 module.
Oh, there's a V8 module in core. Yeah.
Yes.
That's my feedback. Is just thinking about Chakra is that we should probably factor the V8 module out actually, rather than factor more things in.
Yeah, probably, but I mean, in a renaming sense, maybe. It'll be pretty difficult to do that. I think there's a good amount of things that use it. It kind of predates a lot of the multi-VM stuff. But I think that functionality is important to keep. So maybe if there's some suggestion to trying to eventually move that module to a different name, that might work, but that's gonna be a long road.
Yeah, it's probably a rename, but the functionality is pretty essential.
Okay.
Actually, in a similar vein, there's also the crash dumping code from Richard Chamberlain that actually would be a good addition to the same module.
Node report.
Node report, correct.
So you're saying, like I was suggesting, let's put it all into Node inspect and do it from there. You're saying, actually, no, we should gather some of these things together, but it shouldn't be as part of inspect.
Node report, I don't think Node report fits into the inspect use case at all, right? Because it's a low level, it's not debugging JavaScript. It is giving you a process level, a Unix level, or an operating system level information about you crashed, and this is some high level information about why you crashed. And having this as a third-party module is not an ideal way of doing things, especially if that is a native module. So having this functionality in core is going to just make core dumps better right out of the box.
Oh, so you're saying completely independently, should Node report be in core?
Right.
Okay. Yeah, let's save that, I think, because we do have a space for Node report.
Yeah, we'll need to move along.
Yeah, exactly. We're running low on time here. So sorry, and also I keep getting the Google Doc reloads on me. Okay, so we brought that up. We know there's other functionality. Let's continue discussion in that issue. Ali and Jeremiah, if you want to just chime in on that issue and say, no, we should move this in separately to contradict what I said, which I think is towards the end. That would be good. So next step here is continuing GitHub. Okay, next is let's switch over to trace. So first, I just gathered together the two tracking issues we have, which I think we probably, well, I'll give a suggestion and you guys can give feedback. We should probably close those and open specific issues for the things that remain, which I'll paste in a few that I was thinking about. I was actually talking with Jason about earlier. So I guess I'm putting up a straw man here for things that remain really either on the critical path. Like right now, the trace event system landed, but it's not in a release. So we should think about what's needed to get it into a release. What's needed, I guess we don't necessarily need to think about getting it out of experimental quite yet. So here are some things. Are there other? So one, I'll just read them, I guess. Add a listen capability. So right now we can write to that log, but there's no way for anything, either native or JS, to know about stuff going in there other than looking at the file itself. Add a JavaScript API so that modules can actually add tracing information and potentially listen if we wanted. Add trace points to core. That's been pending for us for a while. And then another thing we talked about last time is what kinds of conventions do we want to encourage module authors to use for their category names and for their payloads and things like that. So I guess my straw man here is that open up 4 issues for all of these. And actually the JS API is already a Node EP from Jason. We'll talk about that in a minute. To track each of these separately. What do you all think of that?
Tackle each of which separately?
The 4 things that I put into the notes: listeners, the ability to listen, a JavaScript API, trace points using, I guess, the raw macros in core, like, for example, in the async hooks area, and then what conventions for category names for module authors. Like, one of the suggestions was use the module name.
So I just looked at this new JS tracing API's EP over the last couple minutes. Why would, like, can't you just do basically the same thing by having like an npm module that listens to async hooks? Like, that looks like exactly the same, except a little bit more high level.
Let's hold off on that, because I want Jason to kind of talk about the JS stuff, and I kind of wanted to know, before we go into that specific one, what high level things do we need to work on for trace events? So JS API, yeah, let's talk about that in a second. Is there any other, besides those 4 that I listed in the notes, are there any other things that are pending for trace events?
I think the 4 you listed, they sound good to me.
Okay, so then after this meeting, at some point, I'm going to close both of those issues, 53 and 30, and start 3 or 4 new issues based on these. Cool?
Sounds good.
All right, so JS tracing, let's go back and Jason and Jeremiah talk.
Okay, so not entirely sure what you meant by that, but let me step back and explain. The purpose of these tracing APIs is not just to track async things. It's for any kind of tracing, but primarily performance diagnostics, to emit timestamps or capture time ranges or performance counters. And all those things are certainly not limited to async operations. Does that address your question?
I suppose. It just seems like we're going to have an awful lot of duplication between the 2 things.
These are very different things. So one is, how do you let JavaScript developers expose tracing data? The other one is async hooks within Node core, and how do they provide data to the same stream of events. So I think these are very different things.
I'll need to take a longer read. I don't think we have time to discuss all the ins and outs of that right now. So.
That seems fair. Jason, do you want to talk more about that stuff now, or any other issues that you want to raise?
I mean, it'd be easier if people read the doc rather than me trying to talk through it. I appreciate feedback on the doc. There are a few optional pieces which I particularly want feedback on whether those are things that people think should go in core or not.
Yeah, so I briefly skimmed through the doc. I haven't done an in-depth review. It's looking pretty good to me, and thanks for writing such a nice detailed doc. I think, from my point of view, I think it would be best if everybody had some chance to sort of think about it at a deeper level and review the doc in more detail, and maybe we can come back to it at the next meeting.
Sounds good.
Yeah, agreed.
Cool. All right, so let's 12:55. Got a couple more minutes. Is there any? I know Andreas chimed in and gave us a quick update in the thread about async hooks. I noticed Isaac started a thread about domain a couple days ago. Is there anything that we want to discuss here between us, or is it just the usual?
So docs and tests should be up on the pull request for async hooks very shortly. Not as in shortly as in today necessarily, but compared to the overall time frame, but relatively shortly. I'm not sure if we'll end up opening up a new pull request or not. That might be possible to get extra visibility and review on it. But progress is very far along on our end for implementation. And that's been mostly Trevor and Thorsten Lawrence have been doing that.
Okay, cool. So let's move to the post-mortem stuff. Richard, I think you joined the call.
Yeah, we got on.
Didn't give you too much time here.
No, it looks like you need to maybe do that next time, but we'll have a quick word if you like.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted, for people that aren't aware of these projects and some of the stuff the post-mortem group is doing, there is a lot of overlap with some of the stuff we're doing. So yeah, I wanted to make people aware of it. You know, Ali brought up earlier whether node report should go into core, and we might be able to help with that. Yeah, anything?
Yeah. It's a bit early days for that, maybe. Yeah, so the two main projects is LL Node, which is kind of getting the MDB debug story for core dumps available on Linux and Mac, and Node report, which is a human readable dump. And yeah, there might be some integration with the debugger, but we do need those to be independent as well. You need to be able to trigger those kind of things without attaching a debugger. So that needs some thinking about. Maybe some of the underlying functionality would be useful, available to the debugger as well. So that in the debugger you could produce a heap dump or a node report, but it is something that the production people want to see as a separate and easily triggered facility. Yeah, maybe we should, I don't know if you should combine these two groups, but it looks like you have plenty to talk about on the tracing and the node inspect side, which isn't going to allow much time for this.
Yeah, exactly. So that's interesting what you brought up, because that's something I've been noticing too. Like if you have a dump, then we're kind of turning to LL Node and maybe Node report wouldn't work with a dump, but like that's where you guys are focusing, kind of those dumps or frozen processes. Whereas inspector, the process has to be alive.
Sure. Yeah, that's the main difference, and it isn't the sort of thing you would use in the middle of the night in a production scenario. Whereas you could expect that your production people to be able to produce the dumps and at least stash them away for later. So that's the big difference, really.
Okay, well, I know I kind of keep an eye on both sides. I think Michael Dawson does too, though.
Yeah.
We try to keep each other updated.
Yes, I think. Yeah, I think we just need those that are interested can kind of watch both groups, and we're probably overdue a meeting on the other group at some point.
Cool. Well, thanks for joining and introducing yourself.
Okay.
So yeah, I think that about wraps it up, unless there's any other things people want to discuss, or is there anything on the call?
I don't know. I'm still just thinking through how related tracing and dumps are. I mean, I think they're both kind of like diagnostics on what happened or what is happening in a node process. One just has slightly different timing and thus like a little bit different semantics, but it still seems kind of related to me. On the note of meetings, would it be possible to transition to using a label to mark issues for the agenda? That might be a way to reduce our agenda a bit by only marking the things that we really need to discuss in person.
Yes, so I will talk with the people necessary to create a label for, are there org-wide labels in GitHub?
No, unfortunately. The tools that we use for making the CTC meeting just pick them up org-wide, but there are no org-wide labels. You'll need to make your own.
Okay. Yeah.
Usually it's something like WG-meeting or diagnostics meeting or whatever. Call it anything you want.
Yeah, I'll figure that out. Yeah, that would be helpful. I noticed that. And speaking of which, the next meeting, we don't really have an official schedule. Is it okay to just put out a doodle in a few weeks?
I think that's fine.
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, so one last chance. Any questions? Anybody see anything on the YouTube side that we should know? Okay, then I guess we're done. Thank you.
Thanks
everyone.
for running the call.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks for organizing.